Do you know what? Podcasting is one of those industries where sometimes you sat there on your own, kind of wondering if anyone's listening, and then at other times you are surrounded by like-minded people. And I'm very, very fortunate enough this week to be able to enjoy the latter. I'm actually recording the Podcast Accelerator today in the Hollywood Hills, about 300, 400 yards down from the H of the Hollywood sign. Very, very randomly, we're in a little place called Beechwood, just up in the hills, and we are here for Podcast Movement Evolutions. We're in an Airbnb, which is absolutely stunning. If you follow me on Instagram, do check that out at Mr. Asquith. But if you don't, I will see you down at Podcast Movement Evolutions, which is where we're heading to on Wednesday. And that's what I'm going to talk about here today on the Podcast Accelerator. I'm recording this outside on the balcony, so you might hear a few of the birds tweeting. You might hear maybe some cars just shooting past. It's a very recluse little place, but there's still one or two people flying by. So if you hear that, this is podcasting at its finest. Now, this is the Podcast Accelerator, of course. I'm the host, Mr. Mark Asquith, CEO and founder of Rebel Base Media, where we make podcasting tools such as Captivate.fm, the world's only growth-oriented podcast host. So go and check it out now. 7 days totally free at Captivate.fm. And the show is brought to you by AWeber, the wonderful email marketing team over at AWeber. Brandon and the rest of the team just help really to make my life easier by making it easy to connect with you, the ever-present listener. So you should be doing a little bit more of that for your show as well. If you're not, trust me, you are missing a trick. Go and check it out now, markasquith.com/AWeber. So today is really just a reflection on I guess, not a reflection because it hasn't happened yet, but a bit of a preview of Podcast Movement Evolutions. Now, I was very fortunate to be a part of Podcast Movement from as early as 2015. In fact, the only Podcast Movement that I've not attended was the very, very first Kickstarted one. Jared and Dan, the team behind Podcast Movement, and Gary and a few others, Gary Leland, of course, a few others, kickstarted this campaign over on Kickstarter in 2014, and they held it down in Dallas. I think it was Fort Worth. And then the second year, which is the first one that I attended, was Fort Worth. And the event has always been very, very interesting to me because it began life as a podcasting community kind of meetup. There wasn't too many people there, maybe 300, 400, 500 people. And now, it's become the leading industry conference. And I mean the leading industry conference. Everyone has a presence there. And we've been very, very fortunate to exhibit at most of these. The first one that we went to, 2015, I went down there with just kind of some guerrilla marketing for the original podcast websites platform, and it was great. Jared and Dan have always helped us out. They let us do that. I spoke at their Podcast Movement kind of Ignite little mini talks, the PMX, and then year on year since then I've spoken at the main event and been fortunate enough to meet a heck of a lot of friends and people. And it's one of those things that it really makes you realize what the industry is like now. It's all still very community oriented. It's still very much people helping people. But, since 2014, 2015, this industry truly has become just that. It's become an industry. We're going to hit $1 billion in ad revenue this year, and that is just ad revenue. That's not accounting for, the revenue that companies make in the space. The companies like us at Rebel Base Media with our products and our brands, the other hosting companies out there, and every other kind of tech platform, all the producers, all the content creators. That's not accounting for any of that. That's $1 billion in ad revenue. And I think that is a very interesting place to be. Very, very interesting place to be as an industry, because we kind of stand on this precipice of the next phase of podcasting. And this is why I wanted to do a bit of a Podcast Movement Evolutions preview. Now, this is here in Los Angeles. It's the first West Coast. It's the first West Coast event that the Podcast Movement team have done since they did Anaheim in 2016, 2017. 2016 was Chicago. But the big difference with this is that I think it's just a slightly smaller conference. It's the first offshoot conference. Now, I know there have been a few changes behind the scenes at Podcast Movement, a lot of very positive movements by the founders. And, this kind of speaks to the the desire and the requirement to increase the brand of Podcast Movement. You know, if you look at the way that Podcast Movement is now positioned, it's the number one podcasting community on the planet. It's doing the Pod Move daily email newsletter. The website is certainly trying to be more resource-led, more content-led. So it's a very big brand change, which is certainly not a bad thing. If anything, it's only a good thing. You know, more exposure for podcasting overall is always a great thing. But I find it interesting because, you know, this did start life as an event. You know, Podcast Movement started life as an event, and here we are, 6 years later, with just like I said, the first offshoot event. You know, and it's quite telling because a lot of sponsors, you know, we at Rebel Base Media didn't sponsor this event because we wanted to kind of just come and gauge what it was going to be like. You know, obviously we get involved, we exhibit at the, I don't want to call it the main event, but at the Dallas event in August, we'll be sponsoring. Hopefully we'll be speaking there as well. But it's very clear that event has got legacy. It's got almost a guarantee of the certain type of people and the number of people that will turn up. So I think everyone is kind of wondering what will happen with Evolutions. But of course, knowing Jared, knowing Dan, knowing the rest of the team, it will be delivered in a fantastic manner. I've got absolutely no doubt about that. It's going to be a roaring success. Again, absolutely no doubt about that one. But what I find interesting about this is that, you know, it's a very interesting split of podcasters that attend these events now. You know, you've got your indie podcasters where, if you think back to 2015, the first time I attended, yes, there were some brands there. I remember the WordPress was there. We were kind of near WordPress with podcast websites, and it was interesting because we're a managed WordPress platform. They were a little, maybe a little standoffish with us. I don't know why, because it's, you know, we're essentially a WordPress agency, but I don't know. I think it's because we were the first real WordPress platform out there for podcasters. Sure, you know, Blueberry do PowerPress, but that's a plugin. You know, this was before they did PowerPress sites. You know, we catalyzed them to do that. And it was weird because there weren't that many brands at some of the earlier sessions. Of course, like I said, there were some of the microphone people, like Michelle Levitt down at Heil. Fantastic people, fantastic partners here in our Rebel Base Media studios. But there wasn't that much in terms of brand exposure. And then year on year, that's steadily increased. And now, you know, each of these Podcast Movement events is certainly become an industry event. I mean, you've only got to look at the party that is opening up the event on Wednesday. You know, this Podcast Movement Evolutions takes place Wednesday through Saturday this week. And, you know, the opening party is by Hernan Lopez and the Wondery team, which is a huge, huge jump from 2015. So I find this interesting. You know, we are in the midst of an industry. That's why I put so much marketing content out for you as an independent podcaster, because this industry now has grown up. It has turned into an industry. And as an independent creator, you know, you got to fight for that listener share. You know, you've got to fight to acquire these new listeners. And that's what I'm going to be talking about here at Podcast Movement Evolutions. I'm going to be talking about the discoverability triangle concept, the listener acquisition flow concept. I'm very fortunate to be able to speak on stage at Podcast Movement Evolutions and help the independent creators out there. Of course, we've got a pile of meetings while we're out here as well. We've got some Captivate meetings starting tomorrow. We've got some productivity meetings, which are still very, very secret, still very, very stealth. But we've got some really fun, interesting meetings here. We've got a very busy day tomorrow. We've got a sort of a quiet day as we register for Podcast Movement on Wednesday, then an exceptionally busy day with meetings on Thursday and Friday. A little bit less so on Friday, but Thursday is certainly back-to-back meetings. Meeting our advisors, of course, get to have a fantastic breakfast with Kathy Doyle, with Jordan Harbinger, with Ivo Terra, with James Cridland. Sadly, Daniel J. Lewis can't be here. Laura Roder and Chris Ducker, they won't be around this week, but it's great to get some of the industry people together. We'll be attending some of the meetups on a morning, obviously be attending some of the parties on evening. So if you are in town, if you're in Los Angeles for Podcast Movement Evolutions, come along. And a big shout out to Jared and Dan for putting this wonderful event on down at the Millennium Biltmore in downtown Los Angeles. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of testing on Captivate. That's my role today. It's Monday here in the Hollywood Hills. I'm going to do a little bit of testing for some features that we're releasing tomorrow for Captivate. So enjoy the rest of your day. If you are in town in LA, come and stop by over at Podcast Movement Evolution. Say hello. We'll be around. And thank you for tuning in. It means a heck of a lot. Go and share this with someone that you think would really, really benefit from it. Thank you for letting me just kind of wax lyrical today about Podcast Movement. We'll get back to some more educational content as the week progresses. But enjoy yourself. Thanks for tuning in. And never forget, the more you expect from yourself, the more you will excel.